Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. And if you've never been here before, my name is Tabitha Scoble. I'm the Assistant Director at the Cortland County Historical Society. And I have a few things to talk about before I introduce our speaker. One of them is cell phones. Could you please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already, so they don't go off during the program. Another thing is refreshments. If you haven't helped yourself, there's plenty on the table, and we really don't need to eat it after you leave. We really don't. But we will if we have to. Well, you should definitely take some. Okay, I'd like to ask you to consider a membership, because memberships do support us, and we've been around for over 90 years now. Without memberships, we couldn't do all the things that we do, preserving Cortland County history. And next week, we have The Legend of the Real David Harum, which that's going to be Dr. John Hartsock. He just put in for a historical marker for his house in Homer, and we're going to be getting that from the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. So we're really excited about that. We've got to order the sign, but that's coming up. And then I almost forgot this, but tonight there's a program at the college if you're interested, and one of our members is presenting. His name is Richard Shiflin, and it's called The Education of Henry S. Randall, founding president of the Cortland Normal School. And if you can't make it tonight, because it is short notice, if you didn't know about it already, he's going to do a talk for us on May 9th at the Cobblestone Church on the same topic. So that's another opportunity to see him. He's a great speaker. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Peg Ross, the Greene Historian, and she's a great speaker. She talked about octagon houses here before, and she really wowed us with everything she knew, so I expect the same with the civilian conservation. Thank you.
No pressure.
You're on the hot seat.
Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about Cortland County as far as the CCC goes, because I just had so much other that I'll just have to mention that I know there was one in Truxton. Someone just mentioned where they thought it was, so I don't know. This program this afternoon is about the work of the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and their contribution to state forests and other lands in the U.S. between 1933 and 1942. And I'll be focusing on two of the camps, McDonough and Chenango Valley State Park, which actually is in Greene County. The youngest enrollee in the program had to have been a young man of 20. So if there is anyone alive today, they would have to be 97 who was in it. So they're probably almost all gone. There isn't much written about the camps from the men themselves. I have a couple of articles, but anyone who has hiked through state lands knows many of the roads, bridges, fire towers, ponds constructed, and millions of trees planted by the CCC. So you can see the legacy they left us. The CCC was created by Franklin Roosevelt in April of 1933 for the purpose of putting America back to work. The country was 4 years into the Great Depression. Some of the causes are words we hear now: fires, floods, drought. The erosion of the soil caused severe dust storms, and the country was in a critical situation. There wasn't a lot of food, no jobs. Farmers didn't know about crop rotation. There had been 150 years of poor care of the land. Timber companies in the 20s and 30s would cut and burn lumber indiscriminately. In 1933, there were 13 million unemployed, and some think it was higher. Some asked, anything like this before? The answer was yes, the Dark Ages, and that lasted 400 years. To show how desperate people were, a man in Canton, Ohio in 1933 put an ad in the newspaper stating that if people would write him to show how needy they were, he would send $10 to the first 75. He received so many letters that he finally sent $5 to 150. $5 in 1933 would be about like $100 today. He surely put a human face on all of the suffering. The thinking of that time, and maybe a lot of people think this today, according to English tradition, it was not the government's job to aid the needy. To heck with the government, maybe it should be changed. And then Franklin D. Roosevelt became president. I'm going to show you now 7 minutes of a video about the CC camps, but it's the beginning when Roosevelt was inaugurated on March 4th, 1933.
Okay. I've got speaker system over here, and I can adjust the sound as soon as I hit that button.
That's all right.
You know, I got it.
Yeah, when he was mayor, he did a lot of the conservation. I'm at governor of New York State.
The opposition to the CCC was concerned that President Roosevelt was not focusing enough on the interests of business. They were very concerned about taxes. And they were very concerned about deficit spending. The national debt today is 30 billion as compared to 19 billion over. And God knows what was back over.
National debt.
18 major pieces of legislation in Roosevelt's first 100 days, and many of them have long-lasting effects, like the first regulation of Wall Street and price supports for agriculture. But there were also some really bad ideas in the first 100 days, things that didn't work, that actually maybe would harm the economy to some extent. You can imagine, at the time, Roosevelt said we were planting 18 million trees. And commercial people looked at this was the right thing to do. Why? Don't bother me. Go on to bed. Who the hell President Roosevelt going to spend that $5 billion?
I remember that radio.
Yeah, me too. Right. That one.
This just shows how many signed up.
Most amazing part of it to me was the speed with which he got it going. 3 months later, by summer of 1933, 250,000 young men were in CCC. It was the fastest mobilization in American history, and it has never been matched since. The local welfare department recruited you. You had to be citizen United States. You had to be male. No CCC. You had to be male. You had to be unemployed. And you had to be willing to spend 6 months. $8 a day. $1 a day.
This is what I wanted to mention, the black population was about 10%, and they were inducted in.
No women.
No women, ever. Black and white were together at first.
I think they chose to be separated eventually.
I think the country wanted.
I don't know if they chose or not. I don't know.
I don't think there was a choice.
That's it. You can stop it now.
It's done. Now can I get and see what goes on.
Okay.
There you go.
The first CCC camp was in Virginia. Camp Roosevelt, it was called. It opened April 17th, 1933, in Edinburgh, Virginia. By July 1933, there were 250,000 young men in the CCC. There would be 4,500 camps built throughout the history, with an average of 1,600 in operation each year. Camps were located in all 48 states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the territories. One of the nicknames was Colossal College of Calluses. Maximum enrollment at any one time was 300,000, although in 1936, the height of the program, there were 500,000 men. In 9 years, 2.5 million young men participated. Reserve officers from the U.S. Army were in charge of the camps, but there was no military training or uniforms, although Army surplus clothing left from World War I was issued. One man said there were 2 sizes, too big and too small. Many of the camps were tent cities until the CCC took on a more permanent status and barracks were built. President Roosevelt visited the camps and enjoyed seeing the healthy state of the men. He was considered God to many of the men. Normally, I'm going to reiterate what this man said because it was hard to understand. The family was on relief. To reiterate and add what the video said, the enrollee was required to stay for 6 months with the option to stay for 4 periods or up to 2 years if employment was not possible. They worked 40 hours a week over 5 days and sometimes on Saturdays if the weather had been bad. They were provided with food, excellent food, as most would say, clothing, and medical care. Enrollees were also eligible for positions to help with the camp, senior leader, mess steward, storekeeper, and cooks. And they were paid a little bit more, but generally, each enrollee got $1 a day, $30 a month, and $25 was sent home to his family. Each CCC camp was located in the area of particular conservation work and organized in a unit of up to 200 enrollees. The camp had 5 barracks. This was pretty general for all of them. 5 barracks for 40 enrollees each with 3 wood stoves. See the wood stoves there? I asked Gary Owens there, could be his first name. Greg Owens about the wood stoves. I didn't know how they heated these, and he said generally there were wood stoves, and then I read there were 3 wood stoves in these barracks. Staff quarters, medical dispensary, mess hall, recreation hall, there's another one, educational building, lavatory and showers, administrative offices, tool room and motor pool, garages. That's a recreation room, I guess, yeah, ping pong. And then the trucks and things, the motor pool garages. The CCC performed 300 possible types of work with 10 classifications. I'll just go over it quickly. 1, structural improvements, bridges, lookout towers for fire, service buildings, transportation, truck trails or foot trails. 3, erosion control. 4, flood control, irrigation, drainage, etc. 5, forest culture, planting trees. Over 2 billion trees were planted. Timber stand improvement, etc. 6, forest protection, fire prevention, insect and disease control. Because of deforestation, firefighting and fire towers were of prime importance. 7, landscape and recreation, public camp and picnic ground development, range, elimination of predatory animals. 9, wildlife, fish stocking was big. 10, miscellaneous, emergency work, mosquito control. Some famous enrollees were Raymond Burr, Robert Mitchum, Archie Moore, Stan Musial, and Walter Matthau. And I'm sure many, he was saying, was it your uncle?
My uncle, yeah, my dad's brother.
Was in, and he didn't know until he mentioned him not too long ago. I have some statistics about the CCC in New York State. There were 7 camps in Chenango County. Preston Hollow, 2 in Sherburne, 1 in Norwich, North Versailles, McDonough, and Greene. There were 11 more in the adjacent counties of Madison, Broome, and Cortland. So where we are today, there were 17 camps within a 40-mile radius. There were, and I just learned there were, didn't know, the Cortland County, I just don't know, but the Truxton was one of them. There were 102 CCC camps in New York State. 20 of them were designated as C, which is colored. Now, it's hard to know what to say because it's all colored when everything I read, but they do use Negroes, and I'm using African American, Black. In the camp, let's see, as designated as C, and the camp in Chenango Forks is a C, and the one in McDonough is a C. The date given that it was occupied is June 22nd, 1933. The camp in McDonough is June 23rd, 1933. They are the earliest camps for African Americans in New York State. There was another C camp at Versailles for veterans of World War I, but I don't know anything about it, and I couldn't find out anything about it except they came in October of 1933 and were gone by May 8th, 1934. And I don't know anything about who took their place. It was just hard. It's very vague, but that was for Celia. They were tent camps. These ones were the color for the blacks, and were not on the sites where the McDonough and Chenango Valley State Park camps later were situated. In fact, at Chenango Valley State Park, the tent camp site was not even known when I asked a few years ago. I happened to find it by a chance remark of a meeting of senior citizens in Greene. I think I'm the first one around that found out where it was. These two tent camps are very little known by people in this area. They were not here very long, and as one author wrote, they are not in the collective memory of Chenango County. The first McDonough recruits, who were African Americans, had a tent camp, and let's see.
It was in Preston originally.
Yeah, it's not working.
Yeah, it was on the border of Preston. And
It was right here in this Sherman Bliven, you pronounce it, road?
Bliven. Yeah.
Bliven, and it was down here, and it was about here. And the McDonough camp was over here near East McDonough, so they didn't have far to go, but it was not at the site where the McDonough camp was now. Let's see. They worked. And that is right near where the blacks were to begin with, because this is Mill Brook, and it said that they helped improve, there was a dam there, and they helped improve that. They worked to control blister rust, planted trees, thinned hardwood forest, and did stream improvement. There's their tent camp along Mill Brook. There they are out working. They also did the preliminary work of clearing the grounds, digging the post holes, and other necessary work for the permanent camp in McDonough on the State Highway 220. There they are planting trees. And I think this might be at the permanent camp. They're maybe digging some grounds for the permanent, for the barracks. I'm not sure, but there they are.
Latrine.
The area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember the bathrooms.
There was trouble at the black camp at Preston Hollow. 180 black men had been assigned there, and to bring the company to full strength, 20 white recruits were added to the company. This is when they were integrated. There was some unease as a rumor was circulating that 2 black clerks at the camp were going to be replaced by white recruits. Clerks made more than $30 a month. It was CC policy that Negroes would not be widely employed in Negro camps in any position of authority. Ironically, the first complaint about a black camp came from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The town did not want the camp in the white community with a college. Indeed, on July 9th, Major Shug, the head of this, back to McDonough, did replace 2 black clerks with 2 white recruits. Members of the black company refused to work. 6 recruits were arrested for disorderly conduct, sentenced to 5 days in the Chenango County jail, and dismissed from the CCC. 34 others were allowed to resign and sent home to Harlem and Brooklyn. After this incident, General Nolan ordered the transfer of all white recruits out of Preston Hollow and Chenango Forks camps. On November 1st, 1933, the remaining black recruits were sent to New Lisbon, New Jersey, and eventually were transferred to a camp in Yaphank, Long Island. A lot of them were sent there on May 8, 1934. After 1935, 200,000 African American recruits were segregated in the CCC. I don't know if they asked to be or not, but they were. They did receive equal pay, housing, and other benefits, and it was, at that time, it was very good that they were given these benefits. The McDonough, oh, there they are too. Oh, they're delivering lumber to the permanent camp in McDonough. The McDonough camp is still visible along Route 220 and was built in a similar way to the barracks and officers' quarters in Chenango Valley State Park. You can't miss the stone chimney left that was part of the camp headquarters. But it was a very different camp from the one in the state park. It was a model of FDR's concept of CCC emphasis on basic forestry work in abandoned farmland. Going back, that's how all the camps looked from the air. Vicki gave me a few others in the area here, and they all have the 5 barracks there. And then in the front, that's where the fireplace was, which is here. Let's see, From 1933 to 1941, 1,500 men served at the McDonough camp and were involved in a wide range of forestry work, including the planting of 15 million trees, truck trail construction, insect and disease control, and particularly white pine blister rust eradication, bridge work, fire prevention and suppression. And here's the Army Reserve. They were in charge, but no military was involved as far as the young men were concerned. Here's what it looked like. These were professional photographers. Vicki gave me these pictures. She had an album.
It says Oxford, but it's really...
They called it Oxford because that was the nearest post office to them. And a lot of the camps had a name that wasn't possible, it should have been McDonough, but it was called the Oxford Camp. They're the boys, young men. They were young.
In uniform.
Yeah, I know. No military. There weren't any. The military as far. There they are again. Wow. Nice picture.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they had to be dressed in their uniforms when they were not out working. They had to stay in their uniforms.
There's a couple buddies, barracks. The winter must have been pretty tough up there.
What were they doing in the winter? Do you have any idea?
They took classes. They had to learn. They had to get their GEDs.
They had so
and they would
many
take
jobs.
classes. But they went out and they plowed out people like they would come to Oxford and plow people out. They would plow the roads. They didn't have big machinery, so they did it by hand.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure they had a
Well,
lot.
obviously they weren't planting trees and building bridges.
No,
not then. That's a nice picture of them.
These are all from Camp McDonough.
Yeah, this is all McDonough, these photos. Dining room, that's nice.
These guys were all strangers. They never knew each other when they came together and they became buddies.
Berry Hill Tower. This, they say, again, it's vague who built this. Probably McDonough, they built it. But Versailles could have, because it's quite near Versailles. But it's one of the towers that was built by the CCC. And it's still there. Okay, that's McDonough. In Chenango Forks, the CCC tent camp for African Americans was on the east side of the Chenango River. Anybody who's won't know Greene, but this is Route 12. This is the state highway over on the left. And on the right here, this is called East River Road, and it's kind of a back road from Binghamton up to north of Norwich. And If you know Rick Marcy, who writes a nature article, he just thinks East River Road is the most wonderful road. It's rural and you can see all kinds of wildlife on it. But anyway, so this is the Chenango River, and you see this loop up there? That loop, right inside that loop is where the CCC tent camp was for the African Americans who came first. And they would go out here and they'd come down East River Road. And then here, this is Route 79, and this is the state road. They had to go here. And then this red, years ago, that went into the state park. And they could take that, they were trucked down to Chenango Valley State Park to work. And that is, it's the towpath of the Chenango Canal. And there's still, the towpath is there. You can walk it for some distance. I'm not sure, I think you might be able to walk it all the way down to the park. But nowadays, you can't. You have to go this way. But right there is a lock. Whoops. Well, I'll get to the lock in a minute here. This is where the camp was. This is the Chenango River. This is Route 12 there. Let's see. A farmer who owned the farm on Route 12 over there where the buildings are remembered the camp very well. This was when he was reminiscing at this senior citizens meeting at the library that I was at. His father had boats for rent on their land for fishing on the river. So the boats would have been right about here. This was all their land on the other side of the river. The CC's camp was right across the river from their land, and the young men would swim over and steal the boats and take little rides down the Chenango River. And they used a board as an oar, as his father did have the oars locked up. His father got so angry that he went over to talk very harshly with the commander, and I won't tell you what he said. Another woman who I talked with, whose relatives lived on the same side of the river as the camp, told me that two of the daughters would drive their horses down to the camp to visit and were reprimanded severely for that. The young girls were not to socialize with the CCC. I have no photo of anything on this camp. Nobody at the state park a few years ago even knew where it was. I only knew because of that boat incident. And then I found out later, in fact, I was talking to the woman the other day, I found out her grandfather owned that land years ago. And someone had told me there was a well there. But she said she didn't know, but he had cattle. He had cattle down there, and she said he probably had something with water. You know, there might be something down there. She wasn't sure. Okay. Now, here is the lock, the Chenango Canal. It's still there. At one time, they really wanted to do something with this, improve it and make it a tourist attraction, but it never was. And this is the road that they used to go into the Chenango Park, Chenango Valley Park, and you can walk there. But I'm not sure you can walk all the way down to the park, but it's right there, and the Chenango River is very close.
Fred Lamb from Chenango, from Fort Crane, restored that.
Yes,
He died unexpectedly.
He was one of the ones that really wanted to put money into that, but it didn't, so. There's one of the newspaper articles that show you they were there because North Fenton is very close to where that tent camp was. It's just down the road on Route 79, and so they went down to the church there to sing. And I know of some woman who remembered them singing there too. So there they use the term Negroes. Now, there is an article in the Binghamton Press that states that the first enlistment program was over on September 30th, 1933, and new recruits were being sought for CCC camps. On October 28, 1933, the press headline is "White Recruits Will Take Over Forestry Camps." I don't know why exactly. There was no problem here at all that I know. It said the new white recruits will replace a contingent of Negro workers who have been engaged in work at the Chenango Valley State Park during the last 6 months. They really weren't there 6 months, but the workers leaving will be assigned to Camp Dix. A majority of the men who have been occupying the camp were cooks by trade, and it is expected that they will be assigned to this occupation and various other camps. There's no mention of what else that might have done, but I'm sure they began with the groundwork for the permanent camp at the state park, just like in McDonough, as well as improve the park. There was nothing in the newspapers about the bigotry and prejudice against the African Americans, but it did exist. There was no real trouble in the town of Greene Camp except the young men stealing the boats on the Chenango River and the unpleasant remarks made about that. But trying to integrate the camps did not work in Chenango County, at least, so the 2 black camps did not last very long. The one in the town of Greene was gone by the 1st of November 1933 also, and perhaps they were brought in specifically to do the groundwork and then to leave. I don't know, but I think what happened in McDonough had a large part in them leaving. Now, let's zero in on Chenango Valley State Park and the CCC's involvement with the development of it. 12 buildings built of pine to house 280, and you can see the 200 was what was usually for these camps. After the other development, 100 men came from Camp Dix, New Jersey, and 90 more on November 11th, so the completion of the camp was done quickly by December 2nd, 1933. The buildings included 5 barracks, laboratories with showers, washing facilities. The boys did their own wash, and some had never used a wringer washer before. Wringer washer. Officers' quarters and camp headquarters, garages, infirmary, and pump house. You can see it's just the same as McDonough. And here's the camp. It's right near Route 12. That's Route 12, going up Catellville Hill. And the Chenango River is right there. Okay. Now, as I said, this camp's different because they really helped build buildings down there. And, McDonough wasn't like that. The state park.
How it's stone there.
Yes. They're all out of stone.
Oh.
They're beautiful if you've never been to the park. This was the clubhouse started. This is what it looks like now. The state park was open to the public on Memorial Day 1930 and it had already a swimming beach, pitch and putt golf course, riding stables, and some campsites and picnic areas. And it was cost 25 cents to get in. When the CCC came, many stone buildings were built by the WPA and a crew of 200 CCC workers plus 10 foremen who were experienced masons and carpenters. See, they had real help. There were always LEMs to help out, locally experienced men. The commanders of the camp were Army Reserve officers, as we've said. The field stone was collected by the workers in and around the park and from nearby farms. That's another building.
Oh,
That's like a little museum now. When you go down, you can find out all about the CCC. And let's see, there was some kind of a cold storage unit down at the bottom. I don't know exactly. Maybe it was for the fish. Here's another pavilion. Beautiful. They're beautiful. Another fireplace inside. See this design over the fireplace? That was their trademark. If you go, it's over the door there. They put it on all the buildings. And let's see. Besides the buildings, the enrollees improved the park by planting trees, constructing a 3-mile fire break that would also be used as a bridle path and footpath. They completed a dam across the Chenango Canal, which raised the water level. They helped out in times of emergency, the big one being the flood of July 1935. This was their newsletter called the Towpath. And there's a house floating. They succeeded in rescuing many people. Here they're rebuilding the trout lost in the flood. Was the flood bad here in 1935?
Yes.
It was, yes, I thought it was. I know my daughter lives kind of north of Marathon, and it was horrible there.
Marathon.
McGraw, so. Marathon and Whitney Point.
Whitney
Watkins
Point.
Glen's big one.
They succeeded in rescuing many people, and perhaps even more important, they helped in the cleanup, clearing and repairing highways and bridges and all manner of work. This is Smithville Flats, and I just got this picture. That's the CCC standing or sitting there on an old hotel called the Tickner Hotel, which is no longer there. But I thought it was nice. And this is in Oxford. They're helping after the flood. One of the goals of the CCC was to teach every enrollee how to read and write. A majority of enrollees had not gone beyond the 8th grade. Classes included surveying, reading, writing, and arithmetic, history, bookkeeping, and typing. Vocational classes, which I would think they would have really emphasized, auto mechanics, furniture repair, truck driving, and printing. One recruit wrote glowingly about the education he received. I have that nice article that someone that was at Chenango Valley State Park wrote about. He thought it was just wonderful, everything he'd learned. The meals provided were excellent, and most of the young men gained an average of 12 pounds. Weekends were free unless you had KP. Some hitchhiked home, and there was a bus to take the boys to Binghamton. Roller skating was popular because it only cost 25 cents. But sometimes the townspeople were leery of so many young men coming in. And one enrollee mentioned that nice girls didn't associate with the CCC boys. I mentioned that before that other camp. Eventually, the local people realized the CCC camps were helping the local economy in many ways, and were grateful to have them and appreciated the work they were doing, especially after the flood. I think that flood, really,
That was the turning
point. They were okay. By 1939, the camps were changing, and by then there were less recruits as the Depression had lessened, and many had full-time, oh yeah, I was going to mention, see the boxing ring?
Yeah.
It mentioned there were all kinds of athletic events, and they often competed with the other CCC camps a lot. I've read this. But boxing was one of the biggest. One of the photos here shows the ring very clearly. As one commander stated, it was the first time that some of the young men had lived with all different nationalities, and there was strife at times. Having two rivals box seemed to clear the air. Okay, the Chenango Forks camp, after so many of them were leaving because of now they had employment, the Chenango, it became a cooks and bakers school. They had a twofold goal: to raise the standard of the mess in CC camps and teach the men a valuable trade. By September 1941, when the 100 recruits of the Cooks and Bakers School moved to Fort Dix, notice now it's Fort Dix, before it was Camp Dix, 2,000 students had been trained here in Chenango State Park. It was the last of the CCC camps in Broome County to shut down. 6 of the 18 buildings were turned over to the New York State Parks Commission. The remainder weren't completely demolished until 1946. I was told that the buildings that remained were often used by hobos who would jump off the train and sleep in them. By the time the CCC camp was gone in 1941, now the facilities at Chenango Valley include just everything, and it's an 18-hole golf club now, and my golf course, and my husband said it's just a wonderful course. It's one of the better ones around. The X is where the camp was. It's between the, where is it, I can't read, 13th and 14th holes. I don't know. See one of the holes there on the golf course. But it's a very nice state park. It has a scout camp, pro shop, clubhouse, bathing beach, and bathhouse, 3 group shelters, a recreational pavilion, 6 picnic areas, and all kinds of things there. So that's the story of the Chenango Forks Camp as well as I can research it. It was one of 4,500 camps in the U.S. and 800 state parks were developed. This state park is a thing of beauty, and what a wonderful legacy it has left.
How pretty.
The CCC has left, and this is the entrance to Chenango Valley State Park. Although the CCC was probably the most popular of the New Deal programs, it was never a permanent agency. Fewer eligible young men were available after conscription started in 1940. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, all federal programs were revised to emphasize the war effort. Most CCC work, except for wildland firefighting, was shifted to military bases to help with construction. The CCC disbanded on June 30th, 1942. And this is what is left at McDonough.
And a kiosk now.
And now there's a kiosk there that, there's more than one kiosk, there's a few, but it explains the CCC program. If you're ever on State Route 220 that goes to McDonough, stop and look. You'll see it. It's all behind the chimney there.
Yeah.
Do you think this kind of program would work nowadays?
God, it'd be nice if they tried it.
You see, there's not much history on Cortland County CCC camps because Cortland County doesn't have a state park.
That could be. How many? You don't know how many camps there were in Cortland County?
Not right off.
I only knew of one. And that was
The one in
Prussian.
Chenango, that's all I know about for a
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah.
Shenango. She said Shenango. There, when you go to
Shenango.
Taylor over.
Mhm.
The remnants of
Truxton, the camp.
my having been there was at least 10 years ago and maybe even 15 when somebody's Fish and Wildlife organization was using the land that it was on, but immediately off the main road, to the right, which I think is west, there is somewhat of a foundation of where the longhouses were supposedly existent. And on the other side of the street, there's a shelter and a picnic area, and there very well may be some reference to the fact that the property was originally.
Well, the
CCC.
superintendent of that camp was a local man who was very well known, Samuel, can't say his name right now. I have the information because I researched the CCC camps in New York State.
How about if you go on Fulton history, what does it say about CCC in New York State?
There's a lot of camps that it highlights, and it does a lot of the stories about the problems, like
So
the
maybe
Negro
we can
camps.
find some.
There is
When I was trying to do this, the only name that ever came up was Mr. Kennedy, who organized very central New York State, and he was out of Binghamton, so.
Mhm. There was a superintendent that was local, and he was a prominent citizen here, and he was their superintendent for a while. There's a website you could go to that has a list of all of them. The problem is, they're not in numerical order by camp, and they're not in alphabetical order by town. So, and if you want to put in Cortland County, it may not come up as one because they didn't put Truxton in Cortland County. That was somebody's mistake.
Oh,
It's,
yeah, I think there's a lot of mistakes in that list.
Yeah.
There are, because it was done by volunteers, I read, it took them a long, long time. Because they moved from one camp to another a lot, they moved them around. Yes.
You know, Visalia, Camp Visalia.
Yes,
I wonder if that might have been a location for
it
a
was.
CCC. I
Oh,
don't
it
know that
was.
for sure.
Yes, it was.
Well, I was wondering if the CCC camp became Camp Versailles, the correctional facility.
Well, yeah, one or the
Yeah.
other. Yeah, that's what I wondered.
Yes,
it was. But
I think
It became the
the fire
correctional.
tower on Morgan Hill was probably erected by the CCC people.
I wouldn't be surprised.
yeah,
I know that in McDonough, they had a newspaper called Chips. You saw the one called Towpath down there. The one in McDonough was called Chips. And during the flood of 35, they wrote a very lengthy report on everything they did. When the CCC camp in Preston, I call it Preston because I called it Camp Preston, where the blacks were, created all that problem, Oxford Village and town wrote a letter and said, we don't want them here.
That's right.
We don't want juvenile delinquents coming up from New York City in that area. We don't want the blacks here. And they were very much against it.
Some things never changed.
Right. And then when the flood hit and they saved all these people's lives, they were greeted with open arms. I have a picture of the CCC camp sitting on Lafayette Park, taking a break during the rescue work. And I was amazed at how many men there
well,
were.
I like that picture.
I'll send it to
Put
you.
it in.
I was fortunate, somebody found an album of original photographs from the CCC camp in McDonough, and I got it, so I lucked out.
Do you have any information on any of the work that, I'm assuming that they must have worked at, probably at Bowman State Park?
Yeah.
Lake State Park
They
too.
rebuilt the
I don't know.
Lake Ludlow Dam. See, the Lake Ludlow Dam collapsed during that flood.
Yeah,
And they had to rebuild it, and I've got pictures of them working on that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they worked on Bowman because that was part of their,
It's a neat park.
yes.
I probably got the wrong bridge, but one of the bridges that goes over the East River here, I don't think it's Young's Crossing, I think it's the bridge before Young's Crossings that has the plaque on the end of it that it was constructed by the CCC. That bridge may have even been replaced by now, and I hope the plaque is still around someplace.
Peg,
Is
I
it a
don't know whether
historic
you
marker?
know or not, but
Pardon me?
Is
the,
it a historic marker?
Yeah, it was a brass plaque that was
Oh,
on the
okay.
end of the bridge that said it was constructed or
Oh,
built or put there by the CCC.
the old grandstand in Greene.
That was a WPA
Yeah,
project.
yeah, I talked to the supervisor on that about years ago.
Yes. Yeah, it was one of those government programs.
Our post office was a WPA project.
Yeah. Mr. Ramstein lived across the street from me in McGraw, and he was part of the Green Thumb program. Anyways, he worked for CCC in Binghamton, reinforcing the riverbanks down through there. I don't know what period of time. What he did for when we had the Green Thumb program in McGraw, he was a very good carpenter. So it was a trait that he had, a trade he had picked up. I don't know what brought him up to McGraw. Maybe he was at the CC camp in Truxton. I don't really know. I wish I did now.
You know, they say they weren't military, but you'll see them in uniform. They had reveille. They had everything that they had to follow, just like the military would. And then when World War II started, a lot of the CCC camp workers went in there, and they already had a lot of that.
Yeah, and I read
military
they were excellent. So
Well, they stand to be corrected, but there could very well have been instrumental in the planting of all the pine trees that look like they need to be replaced at the Cortland Waterworks. They may very well have planted those.
They
I heard
used
some complaints about them planting so many, was it white pine that didn't really last, you know?
They used, my understanding is that they, in Cortland, in the city of Cortland, that they planted 2 trees in front of all the houses in certain streets. I don't know how much of it they did, but I live on Lincoln Ave, and every house used to, when I was a kid, had 2 trees in front of it.
Oh, that's interesting, and they didn't last very long.
We had elm trees, they had the blights.
I was gonna say.
Well, they had a lot of maple trees. They had a lot of maple trees, and unfortunately, people think it's great to cut down trees now, and that's not a good thing. But I also had one of my uncles, and I can't remember whether it's on my mother's side or my father's side, went to Montana for the CCC.
Oh, yeah.
And places in the South, I can remember this lady that was a neighbor of one of my daughters, and she had this great stone wall built around her house, and it was done by the CCC. It was about this high.
Florida has a wonderful museum, CCC Museum. I think it's down around Sebring. My husband and I stopped to see it one time in a park, and it's too bad New York State doesn't have something of that. It's history also.
Yeah, well, I guess the kiosk up there at McDonough, they tried to have some.
Well, some of the museums in the Adirondacks
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
have that.
yeah,
because
true.
They did a lot of work in the
Yeah,
Adirondacks.
Bald Mountain, yeah.
So I don't imagine, if it happened, they keep, if you have that many men, seems likely they have camp followers, women.
I know.
But they probably won't record it, make it part of the history.
I have no idea. All they know is that no women were ever in.
Yeah.
But maybe they followed. I don't know. I never heard.
And there's money, of course, those guys didn't have much money, but
They didn't have
most of the
any
money
money.
went back to their family.
They
If you
were,
only had $1, there's not
I
much.
know, they didn't have any
They
money.
didn't get the money, it automatically went. All they got was $5.
Really?
And they could go down to Oxford and go to Smalley's Theater for 25 cents. But because the farmers, and I'm emphasizing the farmers mostly, did not want very young daughters hanging around
That's
them.
right.
If the girls were gonna go to the theater that night,
That's right.
they could not run into the CCC workers. They had to sit off to the side. It's segregation again. They had to sit off to the side because they didn't want them associating with them and getting them molested and raped and.
What was such a misconception then too about the CCC workers, that they were scumbags and they were delinquents
Well, the
and
first-
all this stuff, and I remember my father saying that, oh, they think these guys are just doing this to stay out of jail and they're the nicest bunch of guys, and it was to
Yeah.
help people. It wasn't to, it wasn't like putting them in jail again or putting them on a work camp.
Well,
It
if
was
they
to try to
hadn't-
help.
If they
Well-
hadn't had that problem at the Preston camp, I think the feeling would have been a little different. But there was a riot. They
Not
had
by
to call
fathers
in
of
the
daughters,
police.
because these guys had no money.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so fathers of daughters wanted their daughters to marry better and
Right.
be better.
Right.
And they looked at them as a bunch of travelers, coming through, and here goes your daughter with a bunch of guys that have no money.
Well, and you hear
You know.
something going on in New York City and what the guys did down there.
Yeah.
You're bringing them up here
Yep.
and putting them close to the,
I was trying to think what they used to call it. They used to have a nickname for some of those guys because they were brought up from the city and things
Yep.
like that. And it was-
oh, they had their nicknames. There was
I'm sure they did.
I think that was the thing. I hiked to Shenandoah in Virginia when it started out talking about Virginia. So it was a disappointing thing going to, I think it was the CC that built the Shenandoah Park there, which is like a 100-mile trail there, 100 mile to drive through it.
I bet they did.
A lot of those stone bridges that go over the highways.
Oh, some of those things are beautiful that they did. Like those stone buildings at the park.
And it's amazing how still to this day the edges are perfectly straight. I used to camp a lot down there. They have tons of campsites down there
Yes.
to
So
camp.
where
And
did
they
the
also have a
national
lot of
debt go
cabins.
with, when the government got through paying people? How many people were involved? How many cooks and officers
500 and some
and
thousand
buildings?
altogether.
And they had to pay all these people.
I know.
They said it boosted the economy because they had to send their money home, but then they came to Oxford and spent their money. I don't know where else they would have gone, probably Binghamton. But it did boost the economy. It was a successful program.
It didn't have to boost it very high because
It was
one
bad.
thing offset the other. They
Yes.
were either drawing food, shelter, and clothing for nothing, or they were earning $1 a day.
Well, and there weren't enough job openings for everybody. So yes, they were draining the economy in one respect, but they were building it up in another by putting these men to work. But the most important thing was they were teaching them a trade too. And some of these men weren't even educated enough to get a trade, but they became carpenters and bakers and cooks, and they went on, and they had to learn languages. They had to learn, like she said, to do these different typical school.
You think that's the best way for us to do away with DSS?
It'd be a good idea.
It would be a great idea.
You
Yes.
earn 5, I'll give you 5. If you earn 10, I'll give you 10.
No,
You don't
because
earn nothing.
what
that's-
happens today is they get a lawyer and claim they have a bad back, and then they
Well,
vote for
it's-
this, so it's.
Yeah, constitutional rights, civil rights, you know, it's everything.
So I'm guessing after doing all that hard work, you couldn't even get a beer at your camp. No beer.
Yeah, they
So-
weren't allowed to drink.
Huh?
They weren't allowed to drink at the
No, I don't
camps.
think so.
No. They weren't allowed to come into town to drink either. I mean, they could have a soda, but they could not have liquor.
I wonder if a lot of them got excused from their work.
Yeah, I wonder.
I didn't see any chunky monkeys in
I
those
doubt
it.
pictures.
No,
They were pretty trim guys. They were out doing something or other there.
The other thing
It
that
must
made
have
me
been a
laugh,
penalty for slipping out with the farmer's
Little-
daughter.
no, that's been-
Little white lightning.
some of the guys were very white, pale when they came up. And you saw the pictures of them without their shirts on after they worked outside all day, got suntanned and everything. They looked like Native Americans rather than the white pale ones that came up, but they kept them busy. I read that article in Chips about the flood. And these guys, as it said, were like 20 years old. And the one story they wrote about was how this family was drowning and their children. And the guys were so emotional, but they did their job, just like EMS and everybody else does today. They went in, they did the job, they saved them. And they saved people from going off and washed out bridges. They stayed there all day, all night. And then after it was all over with, they fell apart. You know, they came unglued. And the churches sent clergy to the camps, and you know, they shared with them the horror stories of what they went through. And after reading that, you know, it's really kind of sad when you think about how much they weren't welcomed, and then all of a sudden the flood made it different. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.